Joining me from CNBC's global mothership in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, not far from the George Washington Bridge, is Dan Colarusso, Senior VP of News at CNBC. He's a veteran of Reuters, Condé Nast, the New York Post, Bloomberg TV, where you and I crossed paths briefly. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. And it's so nice to break up my day with this.
Oh, finally.
We get out of the morning tumult of the markets. We don't get the close coming up. It's really nice. It's a nice break to the day.
Interestingly, you and I met, I think when you were at the New York Post, you were doing Squawk Box or something. You were doing a morning show at CNBC, and either it was on the stock exchange or something. That's where I met you. Back when I was at Business Week, or maybe it was when I was doing my Times internship. You were very accessible, non-elite, man of the people, like a Mets fan.
Are you trying to say I'm not as smart as most people?
You were not elitist. You didn't smack of the elitism that other people did, and I loved it.
Well, thanks. That's nice. I used to be, it's very funny. I had been on Squawk for years through many jobs. When I was at the Post, they would have me on to be like the crazy New York tabloid guy. When I was at Reuters, they would have me on to be the worldly business guy. Condé Nast, I was on to dress well. But I had never entertained working here until, a couple of times they had reached out loosely. But this is the first time they ever called me was for this job. So it's pretty impressive.
Now, I want you to take me back to the last year you were at the Post, for example.
The last year I was at the Post?
The final year you were at the Post.
I was city editor at the Post. I wasn't business editor.
Give me city editor of the year, because
city editor it was a rough job. It was a rough transition.
Final year was then?
That was my final year, and it was 2007.
Imagine in 2007, Dan Colarusso, you're at the New York Post, and I say, in the year 2025, 18 years hence, I showed you this headline from May 2025 of President Donald Trump shaking the hand of the new open-minded ruler of a free Syria and extolling freedom. Now, everybody, you have to understand that if you're a veteran, gristled, ink-stained wretch from New York covering Donald Trump to us, back in the day was this real estate developer, this carnival barker, this self-promoter. I think he was in the throes of The Apprentice. Have we just gotten used to it, or does it still blow your mind? Do you have a conversation with 2007 Dan?
You know what? I haven't had a conversation with 2007 in a long time, but prompted, I will tell you, that would blow my mind. I mean, at that point, Trump had been, I don't know if it was pre-apprentice or close to apprentice, but he was not on the radar anymore. I mean, he had just gotten married, maybe.
And I think Hillary and Bill were at the wedding with Melania.
Yeah. I mean, so we covered him in terms of our real estate section, and he would occasionally, I guess, call in tips to the gossip guys, but it was not like, he wasn't like a page 3579, in a tabloid, 3579. He was 3579 if he had Melania on his arm, but he wasn't a 3579 on his own. He was business section.
We never imagined that he would be the crystallization of kind of the populist movement. The GOP became the MAGA party. Because, look, if you look back, he gave money to Hillary's campaign in 2008. I believe he gave money to the Attorney General campaign for Kamala in 2011 in California. And there was this just opportunistic pivot. I mean, it's old news to everybody, and certainly you guys cover markets and tariffs. If you imagine that the biggest trade war in the world would have been started by Donald Trump.
It's fascinating because you look at all that stuff, and, CNBC here, before I got here, they used to do Trump Tuesdays or something, where they would have him on all the time because it was a cross-promotion with the Apprentice folks. And you heard that stuff, and if you were watching from another place, you just kind of shrug it off and say, oh, that's entertainment. And now it's policy.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting, and maybe it should have been, look, I'm not declaring it right or wrong. It is, and we've all, and you come to grips with it as a real journalist, you have to come to grips with the fact that it is, and you go from there. But it's startling to me. It's startling to me still.
I have to tell you, Dan, before, my old stomping grounds, Business Week was purchased by Bloomberg. I would do CNBC every Friday. I would go on and co-host with Sue Herrera and Bill Griffith. It was a great show, Power Lunch. And
legendary anchors. Legendary.
Give us a nice car. They'd take me across the river. The driver would say, Shaquille O'Neal lives nearby in one of these Palisades thing. And it was great. And I remember the weightless feeling. It was 2008, 2009, and we're sitting there and covering the fact that the parent company of CNBC, then General Electric,
Mm.
was a like $3 or $4 stock.
Oh, it was
There was
brutal.
significant subprime stuff, and it felt funereal in the room that something that to begin this century was the most blue of blue chip stocks, the most ironclad balance sheet, was now going to fall prey to subprime as the markets hit a 16-year low. To fast forward it for you, then it changed hands. Comcast, Cabletown, took it off General Electric hands.
Right.
General Electric is now a footnote. It's been booted from the Dow, but now you are in the process of being spun off from Comcast. They have what's called a SpinCo and now Versant. So the big question to you, and I'm sure you get bombarded at cocktail parties and the like, is how
even
do you
in
have
the office? I don't have to go out of the office to be bombarded with questions.
How do you have a CNBC without an NBC?
Well, CNBC stands for Consumer News Business Channel. So that's how we have it. And I think, in a different time, it would have been more difficult. Right now, I feel like we've created this ethos and this brand around CNBC where whether it's events, whether it's audio, whether it's podcasts, whether it's digital, whether it's Make It, there's so much here that we can be. I mean, we won't be by ourselves. We'll have other brands with us in Versant, but we will. I don't think the NBC connection will miss it in terms of tradition and in terms of when there are big news stories that we can't get to, general news stories. But I think as a brand, we've done enough to where we are singular. With all due respect to my friends at Bloomberg and my friends at Fox Biz, we are singular in what we do and who we are. And I think people recognize that. And that gives us a lot of opportunity in a world where we're not, where we have to, find a little bit more to kill so we can eat it, to do that.
And I've been outspoken, the gorgeous, telegenic, really dynamic Carl Quintanilla. I love the guy. He's so nice. I think he works for the CIA. But I always used to quip that he's like the Tony Phillips or Jose Oquendo of TV news because he's so dynamic. He could do something on like Real Sports, HBO. He can do the nightly news. He could go on MSNBC. Yeah. This is the show, full disclosure, Dan. And is there a custody battle over Carl Quintanilla right now, whether he goes to NBC News or he stays at CNBC?
There are no custody battles right now. We are keeping all our folks. There are no custody battles.
There were hints of that. You saw that with MSNBC and Steve Kornacki, the khaki.
That's a little bit different. They're more in each other's grills in terms of coverage. I would imagine the NBC folks might miss us when on Fed days and on jobs report days and to explain tariffs to them. But there are no custody battles. We're keeping our family intact.
That guy's so dynamic. He's like USB-C, ABCD, EFG,
No, I will tell you, Carl is just so smooth. But we have so much of that here. It's like we have Carl on one end, and then we'll have like even that show is Carl, Faber, and David, and that is you couldn't find three more disparate personalities. But it is one of the great hours in news.
It really
every
is.
Day,
yeah. It really is. I'll tell you, just to date myself, you see all my gray hairs, Dan Colarusso.
I'll race you.
CNBC was truly something at the turn of the century, and I love dropping that cliche. At the turn of the century. We're waiting with bated breath for Cisco, Yahoo earnings, Maria Bartiromo's being flagged on, or Carmelo Soprano saying, I watch CNBC, and then we get this reckoning of the .com crash, financial advertising, tech advertising goes back. And as you know, the cable dial has been really disrupted and shattered over the past 10 or 15 years as a terrible cherry on top of this, right after the financial crisis and markets recovered and people are cord cutting left and right. You get this question all the time. How do you make CNBC the indispensable digital destination, not just like consumer news business channel, but for B2B, the traders? I used to work as a broker and we would have it on, and you couldn't imagine, back, what was his name? Mark
Haynes.
Mark Haynes. You just couldn't imagine the cadence without these voices behind the scenes,
right?
And Ron and Sana and everything. But the world has changed.
Well, the world has changed in one sense. Look, the world has changed, but why the world values an institution like CNBC hasn't. Like, we exist so that you could send your kid to a better college. You could have a nicer kitchen. You could finance, your retirement. So, or if you're a professional, you have a drop on what the Fed might be thinking or what a CEO is thinking about the future of his company. Like that doesn't change. So like we stream now, we just launched something called CNBC Plus, which may become a B2B product, but it's a subscription digital feed of our network. And you have a choice. You could do a data heavy feed or a straight TV feed. But I don't know about I don't think there's a difference. I don't think in terms of digital destination or linear destination. I think of audience. And who is my audience? Am I going to broadcast to them on cable TV? Am I going to narrowcast to them at a CEO summit that we're throwing this week, next week in Arizona? So there's an audience. There's two audiences. There's the investor and the executive class, action and influence. And as long as we serve those two at the top tier, as long as we don't turn our standards down, original reporting, first on, bold-faced names, as long as we do that, I don't think I worry about the economics of how the destinations change, and we'll have to adjust to that. But I don't see our position in the market changing.
You are a keystone, though, in the cable bundle. You can't imagine having a cable package without CNBC.
We are.
Just like, with CNN.
Yeah.
And you're now owned by Cabletown on the way out. And so you get their negotiating power as the number one, broadband provider across the country.
I will tell you something. When I started working at Bloomberg TV, I had moved in with a woman who you and I both know pretty well, and she didn't have a cable bundle that got Bloomberg TV, and I had we had to upgrade the cable bundle. You don't have to do that with CNBC. And, we are part of the pace and the cadence of the market. I was at a venture capital fund, private equity fund, big dinner Thursday night, and a woman sitting across from me didn't know who I was. It was mostly people who were invested in this fund. And she was bragging about how she had been on CNBC and she had been to a CEO summit, or she had been to Delivering Alpha and she saw Ben Affleck. And, you deliver that kind of tribal loyalty and you're going to be okay, but you just have to make the right decisions along the way to make sure you're in front of them, where they're picking you up.
Also, I think that you're barely avoiding violating child labor laws and employing Andrew Ross Sorkin. I think he's 20. He's one of the ghosts hosting Squawk Box. I know Andrew, so I can say this stuff.
He just looks 20. He has that youthful glow.
But this is a very useful thing because you want to talk about portable alpha. I've always joked with him. He could port the Sork. He could take Sork Co. anywhere. Forget about Substack. Think about the people he draws. I mean, even if he annoys Elon Musk at the Deal Book Summit or whatever it is, that is a very curious thing. He and I crossed paths when I was at the Times one summer during business school. And it's just a machine. I mean, I think he forced the digitization of the New York Times, but he's also must-see TV. Senator Warren watches him on CNBC in the mornings. How do you encourage and keep someone like that who can go off and build anything?
Well, I think, in the case, I wouldn't even, Andrew is a special case in terms of his endeavors, right? We don't have many people who do as many things he does. He's an outsider within the organization.
Man-child is what he is. But go ahead.
But I do think that there's a way to make sure that if you maintain an environment that upholds deep credibility, accuracy, you don't give in to it's good TV and lower your standards or do stuff for the, for the purpose of schlock value or ratings. I think you retain a place that he thinks is valuable. You have to ask him. But you like to try to keep put people in a situation where they can, thrive and extend what they think their value is to the audience, and I would say that, I would say that for Becky, I would say that for Faber, I would say that for Jim Cramer. You want to talk hyperactive, there's, Jim is a man who doesn't sleep. And he's great. I was in a luncheon with Jim yesterday with a government official, and he was, he captivated the room. We have a bunch of people who do that. So, you just try to give them a platform and surround them with the assets that make them even more valuable. And that's the best you could do. You make sure your production value is good, your sets look good, you send them on the road when they have to go on the road. I think Andrew's at Microsoft Summit, CEO Summit today. He goes to Kiowa Island. They go to Davos. They go to Sun Valley. You make sure that they're in the mix and you support them when they're in the mix. And you hope that furthers what they want to do with their lives,
Full disclosure, I'm Roben Farzad. So happy to be joined by Dan Colarusso, Senior VP of News at CNBC. He's joining us from their mothership in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, just across from
Some
Manhattan.
people call it the Death Star.
The Death Star. I love it. He's a veteran of Condé Nast, Bloomberg TV, where he and I crossed paths, Reuters, the New York Post. I have to actually ask you about Bloomberg because I still can't, I badged out a good 12, 13 years ago.
Yeah.
And that is sui generis. It's just so unique because I've been using it now, both in the brokerage industry, and they gave a comp account to us at Business Week and other places. We had terminals at the New York Times. As you know, everyone and their mother has tried to disrupt them for 30, 35 years. It was Reuters. It was a consortium of Wall Street firms. It's a closed architecture system. It's the ultimate example of paying for data and for content. It's a stickiness. You can't be a hedgie or a fund manager or even a CEO unless you're on the Bloomberg terminal.
Right.
Is that in your crosshairs? I mean, sir, I can imagine in the meetings behind the scenes, both the GE and the Comcast people and everybody looking hence is like, certainly you can create a skinnier, cheaper bundle that would bring us a lot of mom and pops and money managers, fiduciaries at a fraction of the price.
I think you have to these days in media, especially when we were at, you and I crossed paths at Bloomberg. I was only there 2.5 years. Somebody thought it would be funny to have a New York Post editor be the managing editor of Bloomberg TV. I was only there a little bit, but my sense in that, and this, it's even exacerbated now, that you have to do what you're great at. And I don't know that us or anyone else could come in and be great at what Bloomberg does. And I think it's proven that, Bloomberg can't come in and be great just by throwing money at things. Again, they do good journalism, but they never have to make money at it because they're making so much money on the other end. So you got to respect the work, but it's really trying to tackle a lot if you're a media company and want to become a technology and data company. It's hard if you're a technology and data company to become a media company. It's just the muscle memory isn't the same. The functionality isn't the same. I just don't think it's possible. I think it's a fool's errand to try and be everything. I think they're there and they make enough money on one end that they can support the other. And that's terrific. That's great to service. It's great for the world. But I don't know if as a business that we'd be chasing that down.
Dan, am I to understand that the late Roger Ailes helped found CNBC? CNBC, which is 35 or 36 years old, right? There was a subsequent merger afterwards with a financial news network that was nearly insolvent.
Yeah.
And Roger Ailes really positioned what CNBC became in the early 90s until I think GE had this idea for MSNBC in 96, and he decamped to create Fox News. It's a footnote of history, but I remember when I profiled Jim Cramer, and he was telling us how instrumental Roger Ailes was to that. Is it strange to you that there's a Fox Biz? I mean, it's not per se a business channel. I mean, it's like Fox News too.
Look, when I was at the Post, the business section at the Post was always the crown jewel. We did great journalism. People left the Post to go to the New York Post, to go to the New York Times, to Fortune, to these bastions of, establishment journalism. So it doesn't surprise me that there's a Fox business. It surprises me that they've never turned it into the Wall Street Journal channel. If you own both?
Rupert Murdoch owns both, even though Fox TV is in a separate company than Dow Jones.
So it surprised me that with that kind of news gathering asset and brand, you wouldn't lever that somehow. But I'm not pushing them to do it. Let them do what they're doing.
What happened to CNBC's relationship with the Wall Street Journal? We were always told that it was going to taper off after 2012.
That was before my time. I know we still have people from the Journal on, but I don't think it's a formal. We don't have a formal relationship with them anymore. But I don't know how that ended. I was at the Post when Fox Biz launched, and it wasn't it wasn't it was rumored to not be one of Ailes' favorite projects. Rupert really wanted it. But, I think it's turned out well for them. They get a lot of, they draft off the big fox and they do well. So, I mean, there's enough people in the game. But I just don't think that it surprises me, because it was always a commercial edge to the kind of journalism that we did at the Post. Whether it was private schools, whether it was real estate, whether it was CEOs behaving badly, whether it was companies, like whatever it was, whether music business, like the glitz and glamour of New York business, there was never any doubt that the place understood that money made the world go round.
How shocked were you when Rupert Murdoch showed up to buy out Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal? I believe it was 2007. He made a prohibitively expensive $5 billion bid, got the family out of the way. But now, with the benefit of 15 plus years of hindsight, I wonder where the Wall Street Journal would be without his billions of dollars of patience.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to be pretty rich to own an asset like that these days. And I don't know that, Sulzberger's notwithstanding, I think it's difficult to maintain that. And I think Rupert was probably good for the brand, considering the state of the family at that time. You read Sarah Ellison's great book,
yes, it's
War of the Wall Street Journal, that kind of lays it out for you. But I was surprised. We were in an editorial meeting. We were actually, I think it was our morning editorial meeting at the Post. And I was city editor, and I was sitting at one end of the table, and Cole Allen, the boss, was sitting at the other end, and all the other editors between us. And Roddy Boyd, I remember my Wall Street reporter, Roddy Boyd, came bursting into the room and said, "This just got announced." And I'm sure Cole Allen knew. I didn't know. So it was a jaw-dropping moment. It was a jaw-dropping moment.
Before we go to break, I got to ask you corollary on this. What happens to the Wall Street Journal after Rupert Murdoch passes away? We've talked about the dissension among the children, right? That there's this alignment, this idea that Fox News has got a Fox News, and it's a cash cow. Very unique. Demographically, to throw off the advertising profits that it still does. To have, there's tremendous amount of competition now. You can pick your flavor of militancy and go online and get it directly on the smartphone or the tablet.
Right.
But they're still raking it in. But Rupert, I believe, is 94 or 95, and it was his idea. He is the ink-stained wretch to go after the newspaper. Certainly, would there be another buyer? Would a Michael Bloomberg? I always kind of get into this hot stove league with people.
I always in my hot stove league, and this is hard for me to say because I'm in the business now. You're a militant media company. You can say that stuff. My hot stove league always thought that Mike Bloomberg would have had more influence buying the New York Times than he would have running for president. It seemed to me that would be the bully pulpit. But you don't know how much these oligarchs, for lack of a better term, like media. Like you have to. David Rhodes,
the Washington Post really soured.
Yeah,
right?
David Rhodes, who runs Sky News now, who used to be my boss at Bloomberg, used to say you have to love it. And I don't know, to find the billionaire who loves media to the level of a Wall Street Journal or New York Times or Washington Post is really, especially in this environment, is super difficult. So I don't know. I would imagine the family would keep, preserve, and maintain and grow the Wall Street Journal because the brand is established. It's not a fixer-upper. Like, you can't sell it for a ton because...
But Dan, he's cold-eyed. You saw the way he sold off the Fox TV assets. He sold off at the very top and impregnated Disney with that. Once he's off into the satellite dish in the sky, right?
Yeah.
I wonder about this. And I know Sarah Ellison and others. I've asked David Folkenflik and various other people because it immediately, I have to imagine Mayor Mike covets that if the feds would sign off on Bloomberg shacking up with the Wall Street Journal, or even Thomson Reuters shacking up with it, because I don't know.
I don't think Thomson Reuters has the appetite for that. I think it likes its business right now. But yeah, look, it's a great parlor game. If I had to pick, it used to be easy. You could just pick a Chinese owner. You can't do that anymore. So if you asked me 10 years ago, I would have said Jack Ma. But I don't know. I think with the current environment, like the vanity of owning your own press there's a little tarnish on that, right? You don't want to necessarily be in the crosshairs anymore.
There's a gigantic, great feature. I'm sure you saw it in the New Yorker. I don't mean to sound like it's like a New Yorker cartoon when I recommend a New Yorker article to another New Yorker. But anyway, you're Brooklyn, and I only go to Brooklyn for Peter Luger. So anyway.
Oh, come on. You're going to the wrong, you can't stop there. You can't stop there.
But let me say, there's this the long read of the week, to my mind, is in the New Yorker about, I guess, old Jeff Bezos, who bought the Washington Post maybe a decade and a half ago, versus buff Bezos prime, Warren Sanchez now, and maybe the buyer's remorse with the Washington Post, which, I mean, a $220 million purchase. He was great. He was magnanimous through Trump 1, but it's becoming more problematic with him as a rocket guy, as an Amazon Web Services guy, antitrust guy, playing nice with Trump the second time around. And the place is just cleared out of its top talent. It's gone to the New York Times and other places and the Wall Street Journal. And I think it's such a cautionary tale because, look, I think you guys broke the news when he stepped up. Amazon bought Whole Foods for $14 billion in cash. And that's nothing. That's never going to be scrutinized on Amazon's balance sheet.
Never. It's a rounding error, right?
And no one is going to scrutinize on his personal balance sheet a $200 million asset that loses $20 to $50 million a year. We used to think that was protection, but I think it's also a cautionary tale in that not everyone is passionate about that. You talk about the Rhodes Doctrine.
When you think about it, and I don't necessarily know whether he was passionate or not when he bought it, or if it was just a cold-eyed move for influence, or again, he wanted to do a service to America by
the Grahams needed a white knight.
So I think the one of the issues could be that you buy it and think about how easy it looked, even how hard it was back then, how easy that looks now. Like back then, the Washington Post was going to hire a bunch of reporters, break some news, build an industry-leading CMS, rent that to other people, right? Make money on one end, break news on the other. And now all of a sudden, even if that worked to perfection, you'd have like basically the, social apparatus of a part of this country lined up against you. So that didn't exist. That existed on the fringes and it's gone a little bit more mainstream. So the whole job is kind of, it's like if you sign up to be an actor and all of a sudden you have to do your own stunts. Like, wait, that sucks. I don't want to do that, And now we have to do our own stunts.
Full disclosure, please do stay with us. Full Disclosure airs on NPR, Spotify, Apple, all of the great podcatching apps, and you can indeed find us on YouTube. I don't know what the heck I'm doing on YouTube, but I'm supposed to be there. Everybody tells me. LinkedIn, Blue Sky. Blue Sky's got plenty of tumbleweed, but check us out there. I'm at Roben Farzad. And, of course, my DMs are open. You can listen to us on WVTF Radio IQ, NPR's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Virginia's NPR News megastation. Holler if you too would like us on your air. My DMs are always open. If you're just joining us, my esteemed guest is Dan Colarusso, Senior VP of News at CNBC, which is in the process of being spun off by parent Comcast. So it's a fascinating time. It's a scary time. It's an exhilarating time because you get autonomy, you get self-determination without getting into the weeds or you sharing more than you have to. I mean, this is a public company and there's Reg FD. How does it work right now? You kick profits back to the capo? The Roberts families. No,
that's a microaggression.
No, it's not.
That is a microaggression.
No. I love true crime. I love true crime. I've been reading it up. How does it work? You're all kicking money back up to the parent company. It's called profit contribution, and I didn't intend to microaggress anyone. But so that money is not being plowed back purely into CNBC ventures. How does that work?
Well, yeah. I mean, look. Without again, I can't. I don't want to talk too much about that, but. The idea that when you're in a company with a unified business model, which Versant will have, and that we're all
Versant is the new name of the spin-off company.
Yeah, it's the spin-off company.
It's not Tronc, it's Versant.
Right. But the idea is that we have this great ability.
So hold up, it'll be you, MSNBC, USA Networks. Interestingly, like Fandango. There's a golf reservation app.
And Oxygen. The golf reservation app. Yeah, I think the idea is that we're all going to be in similar revenue generation models. Carriage fees, advertising, and I don't know what to call it, if it's services or audience or engagement. But I think the idea that we'll all have that unified model will make life a little bit easier. I don't know about kicking money back up to the capos or that kind of thing, but I do know that, if you're not, if you're not trying to launch other very expensive ventures, you do have a little bit more, control of your capital.
And there's this time of kind of innovate or die, right? You're trying to go straight, and you have for years. Like, was it CNBC Plus, or there was a great login that I got when I used to do hits there, and it was wonderful, and you would be able to access it all the time, and you could get, I mean, stuff that used to be exotic at the second quotes, no delay.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You could pull up any clip. You guys
CNBC
have some
Pro. That was probably CNBC Pro back then.
Pro. You have some great news breakers. I'm thinking Sherman, the way he covers media. You have those chops, and I just wonder.
So I'm going to take the other side of the innovate or die argument. I don't believe you don't have to innovate, but I do believe that you have to have monastic devotion to your audience. You can't be a philosopher king. You have to say, people watch us for these 3 reasons, and I'm going to hammer those reasons every day. And that's, to me, as a news guy, let's put the business aside, because again, if I was good at that, I'd be wealthy and retired by now.
Yeah.
But I'm good at news. So I will say that you pick you understand where your audience comes, you give that to them in size, and you'll be, for the most part, okay. Now, while you've seen media brands rise and fall in the last 15 years, is they haven't made themselves essential. They've made themselves interesting, but they haven't made themselves essential. CNBC has worked hard, and the mechanism of the daily markets makes us essential. So I think if you take that and then build off that essential to other spheres, whether it's influence, whether it's education, whether it's gatherings, convening power, anything you could do off that, you need that utility. You need that ultimate utility. And I believe that's where I see the win, more than innovating. And you can innovate till the cows come home. And, we did a lot of innovation at Reuters, and, we did a nonlinear TV app, and it was like Homicide, Life on the Street. It was a critical success and a commercial flop, but it was great, but it didn't present utility, obviously, to a defined audience.
So then I ask you this: who is the median desired CNBC viewer in 2025? I can tell you who I was as a big CNBC partisan at the turn of the century. Again, I love saying that.
Do we do this? Do we do this? Do we
you don't even have gray. I have all the gray, but let me tell you. Yeah. Anyway, it was all about stocks, individual stocks, stock motions. I'd be writing the market story for an old, Smart Money, the magazine of the Wall Street Journal, the .com. It was a different era. It was a pre-smartphone era, even a pre-BlackBerry era, a pre-Twitter era. The 50-year-old me, the close to 50-year-old me right now, is an indexer, a devout indexer. I know ambiently if the market's down, I know to kick in more into my Roth. I know to maybe average down, but I'm not so concerned with NVIDIA earnings or the incremental kind of tariff news every day.
I will tell you that you cannot. I'm an indexer too by dint of discipline we have here. We're not allowed to invest in individual stocks. But it's hard to get away, whether it's the crash of 2008 or it's the rally of the pandemic or what's going on now. It's hard to get away from the cultural fascination of companies and the people who drive them. And that's what I think. Yes, people watch us because they want to know what stocks to buy and sell. That's great. But there's that whole piece of it that goes to our, our souls and the resonance of understanding Jensen Huang, of either vilifying or applauding Elon Musk. Like, whatever that is, that's a real thing. So yes, I mean, I'm a slick fielding, light hitting third baseman in schoolyard softball, but I watch the Mets, so I feel like there's a relationship. The Dodgers, if you want to buy a team from Japan, okay, fine.
And Korea, go ahead.
And Korea, right? I think So I do think that it goes beyond that. I think understanding the people and the things in the market is the utility, even for indexers. And I think it's fascinating and informative. It informs people in a way that's very applicable to their daily lives.
And I got to tell you, you guys have really shareable long vids, straight to digital. I think producer Janice
Pettit, yeah.
Pettit, just really great stuff on clean tech and technology and paradoxical, 12, 15-minute things that you really want to watch and really want to share. Like you want to smash that share button.
Yeah.
And digital, it used to be that we talk in digital analog worlds, like be like, in a magazine, like, and at some point after the financial crisis, you just became agnostic. You wanted as many people to share the story as possible. You didn't know what was on the cover of the magazine, or you didn't know what was on 1A, right? So this gets to the big thing of getting people to pay, which the Wall Street Journal has gotten people to pay directly. The New York Times has gotten people directly. I think to a lesser extent, the Boston Globe, there is that billionaire backstop. The LA Times is having difficulty. Patrick Soon-Shiong. My newspaper here, the Richmond Times-Dispatch, has been gutted. Warren Buffett took a crack at it and then decided he didn't like it. So Lee Enterprises has it, and they're trying to hold off a hedge fund. This is kind of the holy grail question, because I guess Netflix has gotten us to pay. A bunch of streamers have gotten us to pay. To a certain extent, Spotify and others have gotten us to pay. But it is the rarest thing to actually have non-subsidized pay-as-you-go journalism.
Yeah. I mean, for us, we feel like we have that TV, that linear flagship, right? And that has a certain absorption rate for content. And then there's all this other expertise we have. So if we could drive that into deep 15-minute videos, we just did a TV investigation on organized cargo theft. It's like the third in a bunch of pieces we've done. And like we're winning awards, we're getting nominated for awards for our investigations. But, quite frankly, there's not room for that on television. We can do 2 minutes of it. We can't do 12 minutes of it, 27 minutes of it. So to be able to use TV to promote that and to use our expertise to develop more content that will make a richer subscription environment, or an environment that then leads people to another subscription derivative, that's fine by us. But you have to understand where that content delineates, and then how much. The big question for us, for all brands in the next few years, is how much money you're going to spend developing content. That's going to be. It's going to be. Condé Nast, they used to say, it's not an expense issue. It's a revenue issue. Well, we're getting to the point in media where a lot of things are going to be expense issues, because revenue is going to be pretty predictable. So the idea that you have to understand the new parameters of the business. You have to make choices.
Do you get to keep the Death Star, the mothership in New Jersey? Look, back in the day, I think it was in Secaucus. Like when I was, turn of the century me.
Office. Yeah.
There was a water tower maybe and a Korean grocery store nearby.
Yeah. No, we keep the Death Star. We're staying home. We're not moving from the suburbs. I gotta ask you specifically on I say the democratization of investing is really one of those mega trends that has happened super quietly over the last 10, 20, 10 years especially. Jack Bogle, a hero of mine, a mentor, passed away, and the brokerage commission is all but gone. I mean, it was the bread and butter of a lot of cable news advertising back then. TD fighting against E-Trade, fighting against others for your commission for Schwab. Now I don't understand. I mean, there seem to be several mega trends coming. Everybody has chewed your ear off about, boomers and that mega $30 trillion plus inheritance to their kids and their grandchildren, financial literacy, all these people that are locked out of homes. Is there a new sweet spot for the demo? I know in TV, it's always been the 25 to 54 is the key demo you try to shoot for. For us, because we skew a bit older, we like the overall household too, because our demographics a little bit older than that. But we do well in that. We did really well in that in the pandemic, and we've done really well in that during the tariff crisis.
So if you had your druthers, who would that person be right now? Would there be a young family with kids T-minus 15 to college? I could tell you that I keep my ear to the ground. Right now, there's a tremendous amount of anxiety over young people graduation season and what to do with your life. Roben, do episodes on that. Roben, do kind of people sharing their notes, sharing their creative tips, kind of what I would have done with the paucity of resources that I had as a 22-year-old in hindsight. Are you able, with the panoply of resources you have, audio, digital, TV, evenings, service journalism, kind of access to smart money, to small business, to be able to feed something on the impulse. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like suppose something like that comes up and it becomes a mega theme, like, guys, at your morning meeting, we want to potentially lean into this. This is becoming a bigger issue.
Yeah, I think right now the issue we're leaning into is the uncertainty, right? And the good thing about the uncertainty right now is that from the pandemic, we train. There's a generation of people who have been kind of socialized into trading, and I won't be judgy and say they shouldn't be trading individual stocks because it could be very good for people. Again, if I were doing it, I would have lost everything by now. I'm the worst stock picker ever. I was recommending Microsoft at like 10 straight fantasy football drafts before my buddies I grew up with told me stop talking about Microsoft. But the idea that you have a generation that is engaged. It's the engagement generation. So there is a factor of people, brokers, whether it's Robinhood, whether it's Moomoo, whether it's Interactive, whether it's any of those platforms now, there's an engagement where you have to be able to plug into. So I feel like if we serve that audience, that will grow us. The people my age and your age will be watching us because they've been socialized to watch us because we were a safe place. Now we have to maintain our ability to explain uncertainty, find opportunity, and point people to potholes. And the more we can function with that. So I would say if I had a sweet spot right now, I'd love to grow the 35 plus, 35, to 45 person who think they still have time, to get their finances.
Are you stunned that there are people getting their tips, getting their pointers from TikTok, from Insta? I think of KS Scanlon and the others, very idiosyncratic influencers in fintech. Yeah. There's this one guy, I got to tell you, and somebody's got to fact check it. I don't know, Ben Kelly or something. His name is, he's like, I worked on Wall Street. I was at JP Morgan. I wasn't happy. What you got to do is leave and find a dry cleaning business for all these boomers that are retiring. Right. It's like this easy. And you're like, is it that easy? Right?
We all know it's never that easy. Nothing is that easy, and
get it's a small business association loan and then find an investor for 15%. And I can imagine, right, where all these people have been wronged by the financial crisis and pandemic and locked out of the housing market. They're like, I want to opt out of this prescribed channel that is not working for me like it did for my parents or my older brother. And I want to go and find this pot of gold of passive income in a laundromat,
Yeah, I think people do best when they wait for their parents to pass.
Oh, gosh.
I think that's where they do best. Look, the financial influencers are an important part of the conversation. But I don't, again, you get people say, oh, I used to work on Wall Street. It turns out they did like a year in the trainee program, at Bank of America, which again is fine. It's better than not having done the year, but it doesn't make them like, you're not getting tips from Charlie Munger. Like so I do get the sense that there is this, but look, they speak the dialect and it is fun. When I have a buddy who makes fun of me for starting off every conversation with, when I was at the New York Post, but let me just go back. When I was at the New York Post, we would win this award, Best in Business. We were like up there with the LA Times, the New York Times, and the Journal. Every year, John Elson and I were there. We won Best in Business.
Oh, right? John Elson, who went to the New York Times, and he's now has this paper in large.
Yeah, he bought his own paper.
Yeah,
he bought his own paper.
Yeah.
One of the great mentors in my career.
It's wonderful, nice guy.
Just a brilliant. In addition to being a nice guy, you forget that he is a brilliant journalist. But when I was at the Post, I was trying to hire a deputy. I remember bringing a deputy candidate in to meet with the editor-in-chief. And the editor-in-chief looked at me in front of the candidate and said, you think you have the best business section in America. And I was like, I do. I have all the plaques on my wall. And he was like, you have the most engaging business section in America. So we spoke the language to the audience that it was able to understand, because it got a mix of, market news, company news, industry news, wrapped around a great Barry Diller story, a great photo montage of Shakira, whatever it might be. They got it at their level. They got it at a level that engaged them. And I think, TikTok engages. Social media engage. The best ones engage. Now, I know at the Post we had very high standards for editorial in the business section. I don't know that the influencers do. We try some of them on TV every once in a while. We had one in our stock draft last year. He did pretty well. So, I think there's a place for them, but I think, either you grow out of them or they're going to have to grow into bigger audiences, because, I don't know. I think you can generate, as a content creator, you could generate enough money in that to be a 1 or 2 person operation. But, it's tough when you're trying to produce at the level we produce at, to kind of be that, to be that raw.
Full disclosure, I'm Roben Farzad. We're joined by Dan Colarusso. He is senior macher of news at CNBC, VP. Macher is, of course, Italian, and that's not a microaggression.
Yeah, that's not thank you.
I either sound like George Jetson or Homer Simpson whenever I use my phone to deposit a check. It still blows my mind. So you can imagine, now that we've gotten used to co-piloting with Chat GPT, if I'm having a conversation with someone and I would say, to have gone and used Yahoo Finance, which, by the way, I didn't even mention. Yahoo Finance is still out there in the ether. But to crunch these numbers, Bloomberg used to have concierge customer service people that you could call that could set up these XY axes for you. But now it's just a query into Chat GPT and try again and try again. How is it going to help you? How is it going to threaten you? How is it going to benchmark you? How are you going to co-pilot with this broad, amorphous AI opportunity?
I think we see it as on a few different planes. As the people we speak to now, we consider it as, how do we use it to aggregate insights from the network for the audience? And we're still working on these things. None of this is actually taking shape yet, but how do we use it to aggregate insights from the audience from our 13 hours or however many hours of programming we have a day, right? That's one part of it. Are we able to create, buckets of expertise aggregated by AI that people could go deeper with? Another part of it, and our VP here of news, Jason Gewirtz, is kind of shepherding a lot of it for us. How do you create tools that make a control room and a show run more efficiently? Like, can you have a AI that looks at a script and is able to generate like stock charts automatically, lower thirds, display text on the screen automatically? How do you track guest usage? Can you track stock picks of your guests to make that more, give that more traction with the audience? So I think that in some places it'll help deepen our relationship with the audience. In other places, it's going to help us create TV at a lower expense number, possibly, So I think those are the two things that I think when I think about AI, and I think about it a lot, and how do we plug into it in that way? And we get a lot of small AI companies coming our way. We just ran into one last week, started by journalists, that could be valuable. We may pilot it, but that's kind of where we see it. Again, engage the audience or make production more efficient. I don't think it's going to replace David Faber. I don't think it's going to replace Jim Cramer. But I do think that there's an opportunity to build it, to work it into our system in a way that keeps us, relevant, adequately profitable, and and cuts out some of the gruntier work.
Dan, when did you graduate from college?
1988.
What was that first week like? What did you do right out of college? This is a Rorschach. I find it's really valuable.
I was looking for a job because I didn't. Here's what happened. You want career arc?
Yeah, the whole thing. It's full disclosure.
Summer of 1987. I'd never left Brooklyn. I got I got into an internship program for the American Society of Magazine Editors, and they sent me to Washington, D.C. to intern for Business Week.
Wow.
And I fall in love with business journalism, head over heels, love at first sight with business journalism. And then the crash happens as soon as I get back to school. So I get back to school and I'm going to go to Business Week. I'm applying for the Wall Street Journal. I have my whole career kind of laid out for me. And then the crash happens. And it's like all the people I met at Business Week, crickets. All the people who have been interested in me, crickets. So my first week out of college, I think I was still looking for a job. I was interviewing in magazines in New York. I was knocking around because of a family situation. I had to stay in New York, so I couldn't do the traditional newspaper thing of going to work in Dayton or Fort Worth or Raleigh and then come back to New York. So I was kind of stuck in New York.
I was struck that it was always a privileged tier, that people that had family money or could take these clerkships that were unpaid or very lowly paid or didn't want to sully their hands.
I negotiated a raise on my internship because I didn't have the family money to even move to Washington. So I think it was, to date myself, it was $250 a week was the standard intern salary. I think I got them up to $350 a week for me at Business Week.
So did you how long did it take for you to get a job? You were
Not
dead
long.
set on
I got a job at a local newspaper that was owned by one of the alums from LIU where I went to school. And so I worked there for a bit. Then I went to work for I tried sports writing because I always liked that. Then I finally got a job working for a Japanese business magazine that had launched in the U.S.
Japan, right? Which was buying
had a lot of money
Center back in '89.
Yeah, it was great. So that was kind of the arc, and I hung out there until 91 when the bull market started to kick up. The market started to come back. I don't think it was a bull market yet, but the people started hiring again, and I went to work for a trade magazine covering Wall Street.
Doesn't it blow the mind when I go back, and I kid with Bill Griffith, if you go back on YouTube and see his mustache during the crash of '87, it was the Financial News Network, I believe. His mustache kept America sane, right? And they'd bring in a young person who's like a multi-$100-billion hedge fund person now is talking about, I see opportunities in Westinghouse Electric. It's crazy to look at something that when I have guests on the show that they say was such a defining trauma, but is such a tiny blip on the grand inexorable chart of the markets. And the markets, which went on to have a spectacular 1990s, had a horrific aughts, as you know, was the worst decade since the Depression. We go on to have the financial crisis out of that. It washed a ton of people out of it. We've had a spectacular 15 years, American exceptionalism. I always wonder, I asked you to start this show if you have this conversation with yourself at the New York Post, imagining, leader of the free world is Donald Trump. But going back to what stocks meant or the markets meant back then, it was really the province of the elite, of the wealthy. That people actually waited to read. They had a Quotron. They waited to read Wall Street Journal. You'd call your broker for a quote.
Yeah. It was like Gomez Adams, right? Sitting there with the ticker. But yeah, the crash of '87, didn't register so much in the way in the general public because it was dramatic, but it was like market crash, people on Wall Street upset, but it didn't have that obvious tentacle into, the public the way it did when, after the Barron's burn rate piece and the internet stocks fell apart. It didn't have that kind of echo. It certainly didn't have the echo of 2008. So because the market hadn't been democratized yet, the victims were more employees of companies and LBOs and things like that than it was investors. And now that's changed. And I think that does provide some ballast these days. But it was when you think, you just broke down 4 decades of the market. I actually think about the market in terms of I don't see a difference between 84 and 2024. To me, it's one span in the market, in some ways, right? I mean, it's all progressed in one direction. And you could see the evolution. You live through it and you see the evolution, right?
I mean, every taboo that was shattered, we're going to decimalization, no more fractions, or the Wall Street Journal is going to color, after hours trades, right. This was my random walk on Wall Street for 2 years. And I just think about how different that world is and how, people say the best performing stock of the century was, I believe, what became Monster Beverage, right? not Microsoft, not one of these things.
Right.
Anyway, I digress. This is such a joy. Anything you'd like to say in closing? I always say with people I love having on, what should I have asked you? What did I miss? If you had your druthers, what would you have talked about?
Wow. You got to a lot of it. I'm trying to think of what you missed. You didn't tell your audience about our unique personal connection via my wife, who
yes.
I believe you guys are both Tigers.
Yes. She's a fellow Princeton Tiger, and she helped me when I was stuck, I think, in that .com crash. It was at smartmoney.com.
Right.
It was the .com that, between Hearst and the Wall Street Journal that didn't work. And she very kindly took me to a bar beneath the Chelsea Hotel. And I think she was at US News and others.
Yes,
and I loved her verve. I love the fact that she's like, I'm just going to freelance left and right. It'll be the Alumni Weekly. It'll be Kaiser News. This, there was a grit that I completely lacked.
Yeah, she's gritty, but I think you and I have seen a lot of things in business news, in the changing face of business news. We've seen the great part about the world now is that you get business writers used to be like people who didn't have cars, and people who couldn't write, and now we're like the cream of the crop, and it is nice to see how the business has changed. And
speak for yourself. My mom's still ticked that I didn't become a doctor or a lawyer, but that might be an immigrant thing.
My father knew one journalist. We grew up, we had a small butcher shop in Brooklyn, and we only knew one journalist. He was a sports writer for the Catholic paper, and he still lived with his parents. And when I went home and told my parents, I'm going to be a journalist, my father was like, oh, no. To the point when even I graduated, he was looking at civil service ads for me. This is a fun business. It's a great vocation. There's no better way to spend a life for guys like us. So I'm glad to have had the conversation.
Dan Colarusso, ink-stained and pixel-stained wretched, Senior VP of News at CNBC. I loved having you on. I wish in another life we had worked together somehow, but I admire you from afar. Sir, come back on.
If you ever need a co-host, maybe,
Do it. We'll do it live, Dan. Come
Roben,
back on.
Thank you so much, man. Take care.
Thanks.